Welcome everyone to today's Smith in the World panel. I'm Jess Pfeffer, the Assistant Director of Science and Health Professions Advising at the Lazar Center for Career Development, and I'm joined by my co-host, Internship Coordinator Emily Beaudry. This is the second panel of the Smith in the World Conference Series. In addition to our panel today, which will focus on students who have completed internships in STEM and health professions, there are two additional sessions coming up. One on education, design, archives, and museums on Friday, February 24th, and then the following Friday, March 3rd, on government, law, and public policy. Whether you are going to attend all of the panels or just this one, we're grateful to everyone who has taken the time to join us today, including students, prospective Smithies, faculty, staff, family, friends, supervisors, colleagues, enemies, everyone. So thank you for joining us to hear these outstanding students. The Smith in the World Conference is intended to celebrate and share students off-campus experiential learning, including internships, community service, research, or study abroad. Students will offer reflections on how those experiences have impacted and enriched their academic and professional paths. For the first 12 years, Smith in the World was held on campus. In fall of 2020, the conference was switched to a virtual format, and we were excited to see a significant increase in audience numbers and participation. Therefore, we're continuing to offer this conference virtually, and we're so glad that you decided to join us for this exceptional program. Our panelists today will give short presentations about their summer 2022 off-campus learning experience, focusing on their projects, the impacts these experiences had, and how Smith has prepared them. As I mentioned today, we're talking about STEM and health professions, and I'm honored to introduce our panelists. So if you're able, just give a little wave when I say your name, and then we'll get started. So first we'll have Jingyi Zhang, class of 24, astronomy and engineering. Then Wadzanai Ndambakuwa, class of 23, biochemistry. Then Kelly Zhang, class of 23, engineering. And then finally, Carmen Escudero, class of 23 in chemistry. As I mentioned, today's session is being recorded, so please keep yourselves muted while other people are speaking. And I'd encourage everyone to pop questions into the chat, and we'll have time at the very end for questioning. All right, I think we're ready to get started. So Jingyi, you're up first. We're excited to hear everyone speak today.
Is the screen up now?
Looks great.
Awesome. So hi everyone, my name is Jingyi. I'm an astronomy and engineering major, and then last summer I worked at LIGO, the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, and to study gravitational wave. I was at Caltech for the last summer. So this particular project, basically, LIGO is a very large collaboration. There's 1,000 people consist in it. I work on sort of the data processing aspect of the entire collaboration. And first, I want to talk a little bit about how I get into this opportunity and how some of the Smith's course and research opportunity helped me get through, get into those positions. So first thing I want to talk about is coursework. So as you can probably imagine, the coursework that links to these kind of internship is not as straightforward as someone might think. So if I only take one astronomy class, I probably wouldn't be able to get into those. There's a lot of things go into there, and there's astronomy, there's physics, there's math, there's engineering, and then the sort of I am personally an astronomy and engineering major, and also the sort of open curriculum give me a little bit more opportunity to sort of have the experience in other subjects, so I can be prepared for those kind of interns that works in multiple disciplines. And then also, one of the things that helped me a lot is the 5 college collaboration. A lot of the course, maybe they're not offered at Smith, maybe they're not offering at the right time at Smith. So I check out a lot of 5 college course stuff, and those really also help me. The other aspect that helped me prepare for the internship is the research experience here at Smith. So in particular, there's no one really doing gravitational wave research here at Smith, but the research skills that I learned during my special studies are very helpful because they're interchangeable. The coding skill, the ability to sort of read a research paper, all these sort of stuff. And also one thing that I want to mention is that there's a lot of lectures and talks that are given around the campus, and this is exactly how I learned about this sort of internship. So people will talk about what's going on in the field, and I found something that interests me. Okay, I'm gonna talk a little bit about what exactly am I doing. People might know that there's electromagnetic waves. So basically visible light, infrared, X-rays, ultraviolet, all these sort of stuff falls into the category of electromagnetic waves. And this is how astronomy has always been done through our ancestors thousands of years ago. When we look up to the stars, we look at the electromagnetic wave they get. About 100 years ago, this genius called Einstein proposed general relativity. And come with that, and there's something he predicted called gravitational wave. The thing is, gravitational wave is very tricky. It's very hard to find. And we only find it less than 10 years ago. We first detected in 2015. But since then, this opens sort of a brand new field of astronomy because there's a new thing that we can study. And because, as I said, it's very, very weak, we can only really detect them when there's like a very massive object or very high energy event that happens. So things like black holes, supernovas, neutron stars, those sort of stuff. So specifically, what we're seeing now, mostly are black hole binaries. And this is exactly what I'm working on. So here's a cool picture telling you all the black holes that we now know. So the blue one are detected by gravitational wave. The yellow ones are detected by electromagnetic wave, and there's some neutron stars mixed in there. So you can see here's the entire population of it. So when we have this kind of population, we can study them as a whole. So if you have an individual black hole, you can study its mass, its size, its shape, all sort of stuff. When you have a population, you can say, well, what is the average mass of a black hole? What is the largest possible mass of a black hole? So this is exactly the thing that I was looking for during my internship. So I did two things. First of all, it's called a leave one out test. So basically, I want to try to find some outliers in the entire black hole population. If the average mass of black hole is like 50, and then there's one particular black hole with a mass of 300, then we know something is interesting and maybe bear further investigation. We want to find that and look into those. And second thing is something called a posterior predictive checks, which is just a really fancy way of showing whether our theory is good enough. So we have our theory, we produce our model with our theory, and then we match them to our observation and try to see if which model is better and which theory is better. And you can see, well, obviously they have different results, and we can see some of them fit better than the others. So we can look for the research direction we're going to. And here are some cool results. I did find some potential outliers. And as you can see, there's some models that's presumably better than the others. Yeah. So circle back a little bit, because when I started this talk, I talk about how sort of courses in different fields that helped me prepare for this. So now I want to talk a little bit about what I'm actually doing during my internship without all the fancy jargon. First of all, there's of course astronomy and physics, because as you can probably tell by now, there's a lot of theory, a lot of model. Without basic understanding of astronomy and physics, I couldn't understand the model basically. So this is how things are developed, and this is what things that we care about. So this is both the basic understanding and the ultimate question that we're trying to answer. The other part is engineering. So I personally didn't work particularly in the engineering section of this large collaboration, but LIGO is in the end a detector. So it has a lot of people, a lot of engineering mind put into it. It's a very sensitive detector, so people want to make sure there's no noise, and they have to be calibrated right. So if you can see the picture on the right, you can see, well, before and after some noise canceling, the data looks much cleaner. So it's very helpful for me to understand the engineering aspect of things to help me understand what I'm getting from my data, even though I don't directly work in the field. And lastly, it's coding. So modern day astronomy, especially the gravitational wave field that I'm working in, requires huge amount of calculation, far beyond any human can possibly reach. So the only thing we can do here is to hand that job to computer. So the way that we can communicate with computers, basically, well, coding. So really what I'm doing in my day-to-day life is coding, and then feel very frustrated by it. But yeah, so those are the things that really goes into what am I doing for my day-to-day job. And then I will say this whole experience is very interesting for me because the Smith research community, especially in physics astronomy, is relatively small. So working in this sort of large collaboration gives me an idea of what other people think of the field and how other people are working. So there's of course astronomers and physicists, there's of course engineers, but there's also people doing the maintenance of the instrument, doing science communications, all sort of people. And I can see their perspective on the subject that I'm really interested in. And in particular, because I want to go into grad school, I kind of want to know what different aspect can what different pathway that I can go into if I want to still work in such kind of field. All right, and also I'm an international student, so I want to give a little note for my fellow international students. It will be a little bit tricky to find these sort of research internships because a lot of them are founded by the National Science Foundation, and a lot of them are not eligible for international students. One website that I found particularly helpful is called Pathway to Science. It will list all sort of different internships and research opportunity with their eligibility. So it's very helpful if you couldn't really find anything. The other thing is I found helpful is just to ask the people around you, professors, upper class students. They may have work in these kind of internship, and it's very easy to find those opportunities if you just really talk to them. And then 3 resources that I found really useful on campus. First of all is, of course, Lazarus Center for reviewing your resumes, your CVs, for preparing for interviews. The other thing I found helpful is the Jacobson Center for writing. I'm not a particularly good writer. English is not my first language. So I usually ask them to help me, especially to correct for structures and grammars in my, for example, personal statement. And the last thing, super, super important, is the International Student Office. If you have basically any question, go ask for them. You don't want to get into any legal trouble for working here. You don't want to get any visa kind of trouble. And they're super, super helpful. They can provide you all kind of advice in here working in the US. And yeah, so thank you for listening. Here's a cute cat photo of a black hole. And then, yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Please feel free to pop questions in the chat, and then we'll circle back at the end to have an open question time. Wadzanai, you ready? You're up next.
Yes, thank you, Jess. Let me share my screen real quick. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Wadzanai, and today I'm going to be presenting on the work that I did over the summer at Mayo Clinic. And my project was mainly focused on the impact of COVID-19 on experiences of discrimination. And so just a bit of background on the study that they did at Mayo Clinic that my team did was called CHARM, Community Health Assets and Resiliency Measures. So the purpose was to measure the impact of COVID-19 in underserved communities and sort of like reinforce the influence of Mayo Clinic's resources on how they can best serve these underrepresented communities. And then the methodology, the methods of data collection included key informants, focus groups, and surveys. And following data collection was data analysis, where we identified key themes within the collected data and performed statistical analysis of the responses. And then finally, were sort of like presentations outlining the progression of study and indicating recommendations on how to improve health outcomes. Okay, and so just a brief explanation on the methods. So the key informants were sort of like one-on-one interviews, and this included community leaders, health system leaders, public health officials. And this study was done across all 3 Mayo Clinic sites. So Mayo Clinic has a site in Minnesota, Arizona, and Florida. And so outside of the main hospitals, it has affiliated medical institutions that it works with or it's in collaboration with. And so community leaders and healthcare leaders across all those facilities were interviewed. And then focus groups included online virtual meetings with low income, uninsured, homeless, cancer survivors, pregnant women, Black millennials, and patients. So these were all patients across all 3 Mayo Clinic sites and Mayo Clinic affiliated institutions. And then surveys were anonymous electronic surveys that were created using health disparity scales. For example, the everyday discrimination scale, which was shared via social media and emails. And to the right, you see just an example of some of the questions that I included within that everyday discrimination scale, where patients or the interviewees would answer questions like how frequently you received poor service, how frequently people acted as if they thought you were not smart, et cetera, et cetera. And then so within those surveys, these were some of the key themes of interest that came up in their responses, and they highlighted like everyday discrimination and perceived care quality, which sometimes was low, sometimes was good. I will not get deep into that. And so this study took place on a period of 9-month period. And of course, I was not there for 9 months. I was just there for about 3 months. So I had my mini project that focused on the impact of COVID on specifically racial discrimination. And just a little bit of background, previous research has shown that racial and ethnic differences are present. And people do experience discrimination based off of their racial and ethnic differences. And then it is known that stressful times or uncertain times, such as the pandemic, have a negative impact on how people treat each other, both in the community and how healthcare providers treat their patients. And so stress can actuate both implicit and explicit biases towards these stigmatized groups. So basically, the objectives of this project were to assess the effects of COVID on discrimination across these stigmatized groups, and then testing the hypothesis. So my hypothesis was perceived discrimination increased during COVID. And then thereafter, analyzing the association between discrimination change and race. So, okay, have we seen that just overall has discrimination changed? And how has it changed according to race or ethnicity? And essentially understanding all these would help target these groups that might have experienced discrimination and intervene and help both these stigmatized individuals and helping healthcare providers on how best to support their patients who are from these backgrounds. And so my methods, so I measured the association between everyday discrimination before COVID and during COVID using those survey responses. And then paired sample t-tests were performed to compare the means of both variables. So in this case, my variables were everyday discrimination before COVID and everyday discrimination since COVID to see a difference. And as I previously mentioned, an everyday discrimination scale was used. So each participant would kind of rate how they felt they were treated, and those responses would be averaged. So these were sort of the variables were sort of like the average for discrimination before COVID and average for discrimination since COVID, with a 95% confidence interval. And then analysis of variance was used to assess the statistical significance of the association of discrimination across race or ethnicity. And so these were the results according to race/ethnicity. And the results showed that the Asian population experienced the most discrimination since COVID, followed by the indigenous population, multiracial population, and then the Black non-Hispanic experienced the least discrimination. And so, explaining the previous graph, so like I mentioned, I did hypothesis testing, and the p-value for the everyday discrimination change, which were the two variables that I was measuring, was less than 0.01. Therefore, I rejected the null hypothesis. And in this case, the null hypothesis would state that there's no significant difference between discrimination, but there was, so we rejected that. And so everyday discrimination did increase since the COVID-19 pandemic, and the Asian and indigenous populations experienced the greatest increase in perceived discrimination. And so, although we failed to reject the null hypothesis, there was not a consistent increase in discrimination as we saw there. And so, if I had more time, I would have looked more into that, but unfortunately, I was not able to. And so just in conclusion, so the question was, why would the Asian population, for example, experience the most increase in perceived discrimination? And this was potentially due to the negative responses and accusations of the origins of the COVID-19 virus that might have potentially elevated the discrimination within that population. And as I mentioned before, previous research states that implicit biases are elevated by stressful and uncertain times. And we saw this in our results that, the pandemic, i.e. a stressful time, increased experiences of discrimination. And further research needs to be done, or would have to be done, on how the major discrimination of these populations impacted their lives, their health, and other factors. And there is also need for emphasis on practices that help healthcare providers and community leaders on how best to regulate their stress levels and reduce implicit and explicit biases towards their patients in stressful times. And so overall, this experience reinforced my understanding of healthcare as a multifaceted industry and the things that affect quality of care. And during this opportunity, I had the chance to shadow doctors, do a literature review with some of the gynecologists at the hospital, and also some of the classes that I took at Smith, with Smith being an open curriculum, allowing you to take courses outside of your major. Classes like medical ethics, psychology, statistics helped me come up with some of the key healthcare delivery insights and recommendations to clinicians and researchers following my time at Mayo Clinic. And as an aspiring physician and public health advocate, this experience solidified my interest in learning, therapeutics and behavioral changes that can improve health outcomes. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Fantastic, thank you. Kelly, you're up next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly, and I am a class of 2023, and I'm of engineering major. Can I just get a thumbs up for the slideshow looking clear and my voice sounding good? Great, thank you. If there's any noise in the background, sorry. I have a cute little kitten, very out of control at the moment, so just he might be playing around. I will try my best to focus. So I'm going to talk about my experience studying abroad in Paris and subsequently doing a research internship in Paris. So I'm going to start a little bit with kind of my undergraduate experience, which was very unusual, partly thanks to COVID. So I came to the US in 2015 initially to go to high school. I went to high school. My first high school was actually really close to Smith. It's in Charlemont. And then I went to Philadelphia to spend the rest of the 3 years in high school there. And then I eventually came back to Smith for undergraduate career. Unfortunately, I had to leave campus in the spring of 2020 to go back to China, where I spent my sophomore year there. I gapped a semester to do also some clinical research internship as well. And then knowing that I still really want to go to Paris, even though I haven't been on campus for a year, I decided to go to Paris directly from China to spend my junior year there. So that's kind of my pathway throughout undergraduate. So the Smith in Paris program has multiple partnership university in Paris that usually we match students to different universities based on the subjects that they want to take. Because in France, the schools are very specialized. Certain schools only teaches humanities and literature classes, and certain schools only offer science classes. So I, in my cohort, was the only one that was assigned to what used to be University of Pierre Marie Curie, paying homage to Mr. and Madame Curie. And now it is under the bigger umbrella of the Sorbonne University. It is a traditionally very strong STEM school offering a very good engineering and medicine program. The school is beautiful, in my opinion. The left-hand side, I'm showing a picture of one of the lab space. It is like rainbow color. It is really awesome to be there. And then during the summer, I did my internship at Institut Jacques Monod, which is one of the prominent institute in Paris that studies fundamental biology. It's an institute composed of about 250 researchers from France or across the world. It's actually based in one of the universities of our partnership as well. So some of our cohort also took a lot of classes in that university. I definitely say I was very lucky that both of these institutes were very, very centrally located in Paris. The Sorbonne Pierre Marie Curie campus was located in the beautiful Latin Quarter. If anyone have been to Paris before, it is absolutely beautiful there. And then the Institut Jacques Monod, it's more in the center of the 13th district in a newer, in like a more modernized area of Paris, and both of them are very close to the beautiful Seine. So here I'm going to talk a little bit about what are the differences between education that we usually see in France versus an education that we experience at Smith or generally in the US. So in France, most students do 3 years of undergraduate degree, and then they go into 2 more years of master. And some students actually don't follow this public school path, and they would rather, after high school, they would do this class of, I'm going to say in French, classe préparatoire aux grandes écoles, also called the prépa. This is a little bit more close to a liberal arts education where they take classes across many, many different domains. But the purpose of these classes are to pass these national exams to get into professional schools, which can imply veterinary school, medical school, and sometimes even engineering school as well. Talking about engineering school, because I'm an engineering major, France actually have a very reputed engineering education. It is a usually mandatory 5-year education, very prestigious degree in engineering. And one of the most famous engineering school in France is called École Polytechnique. It continues to be one of the most prestigious academic institutes in the world. So, but continuing on that, another difference between a French education versus the American education, that most of its educations are completely free for the public schools. The private school continue to come with a fee, but still it's usually a lot lower than compared to the equivalents of in the United States. It's also very profession and major oriented. Since the undergraduate career is only 3 years long, everything that you take at school will be oriented towards your major. For example, a chemistry major students probably will only take classes that are related to chemistry, with a few exceptions in math and English, and they don't really get the choice to pick classes. So talking about that, I think here's where the advantage of a Smith education, liberal arts education come out, is that we have so much liberty in choosing our classes, kind of forming our own path. That's also essential part of my undergraduate career is that I want to be a biomedical engineer. Even though Smith didn't offer directly a biomedical engineering education, I have so much more space to also take classes in biology and chemistry to kind of prepare myself to go into graduate school in biomedical engineering. And also I was able to take French classes so that I was able to study abroad in a different country, in a different culture, and in a completely different language, in both in classes and living. For that, a lot of my French classmates were very jealous. They wish they had more time or space to be fluent in the language and to study abroad as well. Lastly is even though we had a lot less homework in France, it was very exam-based, so very different style than at Smith, where we kind of assess students continuously throughout the semester with more collaborative assignments than exam-based. So here we're jumping into my research. My research was mostly studying the instability of DNA and how that can lead to disease. We're mostly here talking about cancer and how we can use what we have found so far to kind of investigate, to kind of explore some potential cancer treatment possibilities. So a lot of the mechanism of our bodies are controlled by our DNA. If they work well, awesome. I think human body is one of the greatest invention by evolution. But it doesn't always be happy. Sometimes it's stressed out or it's not doing things right. And that can bring out a lot of issues and disease, unfortunately. Here we are focusing on one of the most basic genetic mechanism in our body that's called a cell replication. Essentially, that is the process where one double-stranded DNA molecule replicate itself into two molecules. And this process in our body takes about 2 hours. Actually about 24 hours. And there are multiple phases throughout this cycle. We have G1S, G2, mitosis, and then at the end of our cycle, there comes to be two identical double-stranded DNA molecules. And at each of these kind of transition of the phases, there are checkpoints to make sure that there are not faultily replicated DNA. And so our body is pretty good at kind of picking out errors and correcting it or kind of abolishing faultily replicated DNA. So the mechanism usually is pretty good. Here we are going into one of the enzymes and one of the main mechanisms that's involved in this process. We're talking about a poly-ADP ribosylation. Basically what it does is that it reacts to a broken DNA or a broken protein. The polymerase that's involved, dedicated for this process, will build these little tree or chains of protein that looks like these tree branches, and that usually acts as a marker to recruit other enzyme and DNA to come in, either to repair a DNA breakage or to kind of force the protein or DNA to expire, to die. And this is a dynamic process that can be undone by the glycolysis that was dedicated for this process. So what is so special about this poly-ADP ribosylation is that we have found that if we inhibit the polymerase that's responsible for first building up these protein chains, we can actually selectively kill certain cancer cells. The cancer cells that are caused by BRCA genetic mutations are, if we apply a PARP inhibitors on these cancer cells, it's actually toxic for them. But however, as other healthy cells don't have this specific mutation, they don't get largely affected by the inhibition. So this is a selective toxicity for the cancer cells. And this has been approved as a therapy for multiple different cancers, including breast cancer, ovarian, prostate, and pancreatic cancer. So my project, unfortunately, is not on PARP, since it has been really well studied in the past 20 years. We're looking at PARC because it's such a protein that's closely related to PARP, and it's very active in this process as well. So we were thinking, is there a potential of making PARC inhibitors into cancer therapy as well? So I was more laying some of the fundamental groundworks for the team to investigate on the effects of PARC inhibitors. So my first question to answer in my internship was, what would be the effective concentration of a PARC inhibitor to use on cancer cells? We use these immortal cell lines, but we have to figure out what is the right concentration to put the drug in so that we don't kill the cells too quick, but it's not acting too slowly that it takes us days to observe a change in the cell's behaviors. Once I have that established, I use the concentration to answer, to set up a bunch of experiments and to answer more questions on what have changed in the cells when they are under PARC inhibition. And that has two angles. So one, we can take like a protein approach. We can break the cells down. We can look at what are the proteins that are expressed. We can particularly try to look for the proteins that could have shown that the cells are under stress. Or I can also look at the cells as a whole. We can sort them. We can see where are the cells at our replication cycle. Because PARP inhibitors have shown to will trap our cells at a certain phase in the replication cycle. So I can also do the same after I've applied a PARC inhibitor and see if they're trapped. And if that could mean that can selectively kill the cancer cells as well. So this is my team. This is quite small, 5 to 6 people. Even though I have one PhD student directly who was leading me, I was actually got really close with everyone, including the principal investigator. They're so nice. There were also some anniversary days for the institute where we just have fun for the whole day with everyone in the institute across different labs. It was a really great networking experience as well. And since I was in France, there were a lot of vacations during the summer. I was able to enjoy some trips with my friends to Dijon, to Lyon, and also during the Bastille Day in Paris. So I think for some of my conclusion of this experience is that studying abroad in Paris program, it's a very language intensive and culture immersive experience. It can be very intimidating to some STEM students because how packed our course loads are, and so that makes it a little bit different sometimes to finish the language requirements. However, I think it's totally doable, and the experience of studying science and researching science in a different culture and language is a very valuable experience and skill sets as we continue in our professional career, because international collaboration is definitely not just limited to business and politics. It's also a lot in science as well. So having this experience, I think, will be really helpful for my future professional practice. So I'm going to end my presentation in some acknowledgement. Marie-Madeleine and Camille, who were directors for the Smith in Paris program last year, and Professor Rob Doré, who was the founder of the Sciences à Paris cohort. And also thanks to Professor Jean-Charles Cadoret and Lina Marie, who were in the lab and recruited me. And thanks to Praxis Internship for generously funded this experience. And finally to the 2021-2022 Smith in Paris cohort. Thank you, everyone. I wish that you have enjoyed my presentation.
Thank you so very much. All right, Carmen, you're up. And please, as you're thinking of questions, be sure to pop them in the chat. We should have a couple minutes. Carmen, you ready?
Yes.
All righty, all yours.
Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yep, looks good.
Okay. Hello, my name is Carmen. Today I'm going to be talking about my summer internship with Metro Health's Cancer Center, and this was part of the Summer on the Cuyahoga program. So Summer on the Cuyahoga is based in Cleveland, Ohio. It's a 9-week program featuring students from different universities, including UChicago, Colgate, Cornell, Case Western, Denison, Oberlin, Ohio, Wesleyan, Allegheny, and obviously Smith. There's free housing, and throughout the program, you have to do different activities, which helps you acclimate to Cleveland. They're all very fun, like going to baseball games or going to like the market. And it's a very nice experience to kind of have your internship, because every student is doing a different internship and also enjoying the city that you'll be for the summer. So I worked, like I said, at Metro Health. It is a teaching hospital in Cleveland, Ohio, and I especially was with the Cancer Center. When I've been asked like what exactly did I do, it's honestly very hard to summarize because I had a really fortunate opportunity to kind of just be spread through almost the entire hospital and see so many departments, so many different parts that make a hospital. But if I'd have to summarize it within the cancer care, I definitely worked a lot with administration, and I was able to see the huge role that administration plays, which beforehand I was not aware. And it's not like it's just like the physicians and administration. Even I am pre-med, and I've realized that that is something that I have to become more comfortable with, because if you want to be the head of any department, you definitely need to go into administration. And actually many physicians go back to school for a master's in like business administration just to know how that works. So that was just very interesting to see. I also did a lot of shadowing, and what I currently am doing is qualitative breast cancer research. So back to the administration, one of the first things that I had to do was help organize the annual breast cancer symposium. I had to help just like contact the participants, the speakers, the volunteers, and just make sure that everything ran smoothly. Daily cash reports, I was in charge of documenting all of the cash that was coming into the cancer care. This was a great lesson with Excel and just organization, just being very organized, because I was in charge of documenting all of the money and also just taking the money to the finance department. So definitely just being very responsible and organized. And lastly, this is a very interesting task. So for the bone marrow transplant project, I was in charge of translating the document from English to Spanish, which was a great way to like practice both languages, but also it allowed me to become used to and just like learn about the terms and forms that it takes for a bone marrow transplant. So that was just a great way to learn about what goes into for a bone marrow transplant. So shadowing, I was able to shadow dermatology, radiology, the ICU, oncology, and a couple more other specialties. However, dermatology and radiology were definitely two of my favorite, honestly, experiences that will live with me forever. Dermatology sticks with me just because I've always wanted to be a dermatologist. So it's just amazing to be able to see what it's like as in the daily life of a physician. I shadowed David Dr. Crow around while they examined patients for carcinoma, type of skin cancer, and acne, although most patients were just being tested for carcinoma. And at some point, like I said, Metro Health is a learning hospital. So if you let them know that you are on the pre-med track, they will like let you just like dive in with them and just learn everything. And at some point, I was handed the microscope and told to like examine a patient with the patient's consent for basal cell carcinoma, which they're very hard to spot, but that was a very great experience. And then radiology, I shadowed the radiology department during a drug treatment on a cadaver. They were modeling a spinal surgery, and one was like incredible to watch because I don't know, that's something that I've never seen before. But at the end of the procedure, it was myself and two other interns, the physicians on that were heading the experiment, decided they're like, you guys can come in and kind of just help suture the cadaver. So that was definitely an opportunity that will live with me forever. Just that being the first time that I was able to suture. Normally people like, even like pre-med students start with like not with like pig feet or whatever, but actually just suturing a cadaver, and also throughout the entire procedure learning about human anatomy as we went through like each section of the spinal surgery. So currently I am still working with qualitative research on breast cancer care group. So the group we're working on is called the Breast Amigas program, and it was an evidence-based program that was very successful because of the health belief model. And we're aiming to identify the key themes to create more community health programs. So while I was in Ohio, we interviewed the participants, the physicians, community members, anybody that was like part of this group. And then once we developed the transcripts, we are now like reading through everything and trying to identify those key themes. And based off all that, we're trying to create a program evaluation to disseminate our findings to other public health institutions. And one of them is we're trying to submit our findings to the APHA. So Metro Health was so much more than I ever thought it would be. One, it opened my perspective on various specialties. Before Metro Health, all I wanted to do was be a dermatologist, but being able to shadow so many specialties, I realized that, yeah, I still am interested in dermatology, but there are so many other specialties that I definitely don't want to overlook. Also, I was able to network with a lot of medical students, attendees, and physicians, and especially as a senior, just asked them so many questions on what they did to get to where they are. So that was amazing. And also through the public health research that I'm currently doing, my entire view was like opened up to this like new world of public health, and I'm now very interested in doing an MPH MD. And my mentor slash the person doctor that I'm doing research with has been amazing at answering all of my questions and kind of just guiding me through what it would look like to do that dual MPH MD program. So how have I applied the skills back to Smith? One, Excel. I used a lot of Excel throughout the summer. So when I got back on campus and had to use Excel for my classes, it was amazing because I knew how to use it better than ever. Also, definitely like fitting classes in outside of your major is sometimes difficult. However, being in the hospital setting and realizing how big of a role administration is and public health, I am now taking courses that are outside of my major, like microeconomics and environmental psychology. The environmental psychology has been amazing in that we have a lot of like qualitative research papers to read. So that's been great. And I've been able to like kind of input that to the current research that I'm doing. And lastly, journaling. Well, the volunteering, it is not Smith, but it's close to Smith. I volunteer at Cooley Dickinson. And over the summer, I journaled everything, which was amazing for this presentation too, because sometimes, although like things will live with us forever, we don't necessarily remember every single detail. But having that journal with me was amazing, especially now reading through everything. It kind of like made me remember everything in detail. So when I volunteer, I journal everything that I do during my shift, and just whatever anyone does in the summer or just like any job or research, I think it's an amazing tool to journal what you do because it's a great way to look back to it. And that's all for me, but thank you for listening, and I'm open to answering any questions.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all our panelists. We have a few minutes for questions. So I wanted to open it up for questions. If anything popped up, Emily, you can read them, but otherwise, please feel free to pop in with a question. I'm also happy to get us started. I'm curious, Carmen, you mentioned that doing your internship made you think about pursuing an MPH. And I'm curious if any of our other panelists like learned something about themselves through doing their internship, like something that surprised them or like made them think differently about their field of study or their career. So Kelly or Jingyi?
Yeah, as I was saying before, because the place that I work in is LIGO, it's a very large collaboration. Me, myself, I'm aiming to go to grad school in astronomy. That thing didn't particularly change, but it gave me this sort of understanding of how people that other than astronomers also sort of work in that field. I'm particularly interested in instrumentation. So basically building these sort of telescopal these structures for astronomy. And it's very interesting to observe how sort of people collaborate. And because scientific instrumentation, it's a little bit different than other kind of engineering. It's nice to see that how they are similar and how they're different. So, yeah.
Yeah, for me, so I also want to go into grad school. I was very tempted to go back to grad school in France. I eventually decided not to, because my experience, even though my experience is great, there were some other factors. However, I think this internship really inspired kind of the direction of what kind of research I want to do when I go into a PhD program. Actually, we had some kind of very laborious and time-sensitive experiments that we had to do in the during my internship in France. And right now, as I'm talking to my potential PhD laboratory, that experience actually becomes very useful because they are also reflecting on how can we replace some of these laborious experiments with machines like robots and automation design. So that ties in really well with what I'm doing this year with the DC Design Clinic of Engineering, which we're also working on automation design. So everything, I think it's making sense, and every kind of different kind of experiments, even though they seem to be in very separate fields, have really feeds into my reflection on, okay, what I want to research on, what am I really interested in as I'm going into grad school or the industry. So.
Thank you so much, Emily.
I want to chime in. We have a question from the audience for Kelly. Did you notice any differences in your French colleagues' approaches to conducting research or your collaborations compared to working with your Smith professors and peers here?
Unfortunately, I've never worked in research, like a lab, like a wet lab research aspect because of COVID. I was away from campus. I don't know what would be exactly the differences, but I would say in that particular case, there were a lot of socializing or collaborations across different institutes, because also Paris, I think compared to Northampton, Paris is definitely a lot denser with how many laboratories there were. So I actually got a decent amount of chances to get out of the lab and also to talk to people from other institutes. And then also, I guess, more of a French scientist versus American scientist kind of differences. The work-life balance is definitely a very high on their priority. Take a lot of vacations. My kind of the PhD that was in charge of me took a lot of vacations during my time there. So I had to be very autonomous very early on. And they also entrusted me with all these autonomy to do experiments on these expensive machines and be in the cell room alone during my experiments. So I really appreciate the trust that they gave me. But I also really like the idea of having a great work-life balance and everyone socializing together, bonding within the group and across different departments as well. So that's something that I'm definitely going to carry on with in my future career.
Thank you. I know we're quickly running out of time, but I wanted to ask our panelists if they could just give like one piece of advice for finding an internship. Like, what would be your piece of advice for how to pursue learning off campus?
I'm happy to start. I definitely echo with Jingyi. Ask your ask the upperclassmen, ask your professors. I'm actually introducing someone this year in the Paris program to work in the exact same lab, and I actually got my internship from my biology tutor in France. So it's always about bringing up your ambition, bring up your plans to people, and people are always happy to help and share whatever they can. So definitely ask and talk about what you want to do in your future a lot, and people will give you a tip or leave you a little hand somewhere, I'm sure.
I'll go next. I want to piggyback off what Kelly said of just being vocal on what you want to do, because that is amazing. With Metro Health, I was very vocal on possibly going to medical school, and they opened up these incredible opportunities. And with that being said, being very open-minded. When I first got to my internship, my supervisors handed me a couple of projects that I had never really worked on, but just being open-minded and just learning from the process, and also, again, journaling everything.
Thank you.
The thing that I also want to add, except for sort of reaching out to people that you might know, I think it's especially for research internship, I'll suggest don't be shy. And if you need to cold call somebody, it's perfectly normal. And in most cases, people will be very friendly, but even they don't have an opportunity, like a position right there for someone, it's still nice to know the people in the field and make that connection. So.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm sensitive to the fact that it's a little after our time, so unfortunately we have to wrap up. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for fantastic panelists for really wonderful information. Emily popped in the chat, there are a few more events coming up, as I mentioned earlier, so please look into them, register. We're really excited to have you here and to keep these conversations going. Have a good day, everyone.